Welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. 3 analytics pros and the occasional guest discussing digital analytics issues of the day. Find them on Facebook at facebook.com/analytics hour. And now, the Digital Analytics Power Hour.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 8. So, I'm joined here tonight with my other 2 hosts, Tim Wilson and Jim Kane. Guys, welcome back.
Great to be here.
I'm legally mandated to be here. Please continue.
That's right. It's part of a work release program. So, again, we're super stoked. We're trying to cover a topic tonight that was brought up by a couple of folks who were listening to the podcast before, Tim Munsell and Chris Johansson, asking about some perspectives on building and managing an analytics team, right? So there's a couple different contexts that you can do this in. You can do this, obviously, in the context of inside of an organization, building out your team, and inside of a services organization like an agency and building out an analytics team in that way. So we'll try to hit the middle on some of those. As a ground rule, we're going to skip recruiting altogether. Insert commercial of.
It's so easy to find analysts these days.
Talking
about recruiting is just going to put people to sleep. They're everywhere.
You're right. Exactly. All right. So with that, let's dig in, and I want to start with this conversation off, guys, talking about day one with a new analyst. What are the kinds of things that you're doing to prep them for a successful career in your organization? Go.
So, day one for a new analyst here, the comparison we use is like paired programming in a development organization. So when we bring someone in, they're actively involved with someone who's more senior, shadowing on work, participating in work, doing work together, and really kind of understanding the philosophy of the ways that we approach work, which includes potentially certifications for tools we use a lot, meeting and introducing themselves to customers, but really working alongside another analyst for probably the first 90 days. And that we find that that's a really good way to make sure that someone's skill level is kind of level set with the rest of the org. And it also helps them kind of get really well aligned with our culture because, I find especially with something as detailed as web analytics, when you bring someone in, they might have a very different approach to doing specific tactical tasks or approaching certain kinds of questions that might not jive with the rest of the team. So working alongside someone for 2-3 months ensures that you're really able to kind of smooth out those differences.
I should probably kind of say right up front in this podcast that managing analytics teams has been something I've done several times, and I think I've done it quite passively, but I've gotten very little enjoyment out of it, whereas I know both of you guys actually get fulfillment in your careers out of managing them and probably will have a lot more to contribute on that, bringing somebody in and ramping them up and keeping them.
Well, since there's a fair few members of my team who listen to this show, I need to make sure I don't say anything that's not true because they will call me out, or at least I hope they would. So, yeah, I'm pretty well known for this phrase in the onboarding process, which is, hey, take notes as you onboard so that we can start to keep improving our process, right? Let me know things that would work well, things you noticed that weren't working well, and those kinds of things. So I'm always looking to improve that onboarding process. The other thing is about setting the right set of expectations up front, setting up people to understand the values of our organization and how to work well within it. And I think the other thing is, giving people a lot of time with other people. Like, I personally think analytics works best in a team-based environment. You can have a lot of great ideas as an analyst on your own, but when you've got a really good set of people you can bounce those ideas off of, I feel like you get multipliers of benefit there. So, kind of all of our work follows in that fashion as much as possible.
In my experience, what I've found is that once you have a team kind of beyond when you're 6 months or 9 months in and you started to realize, this person is fantastic at this and is just potentially never going to click on this other thing. And so there's a part that says, how much do I kind of shift around the roles? This person gravitates more to the excel automating the bejesus out of stuff. This person actually loves to go talk to the stakeholders and always comes back really teasing out great requirements. And so to me, part of when I have been successful, it's when I've recognized what the different strengths of the team are and kind of shift them around to who works well where. How often do you guys feel like when you bring somebody in 6 months down the road, they are actually doing the tasks and the types of tasks and getting enjoyment out of those tasks as you'd envision, versus how often are you finding that, wow, they actually have a real strength in this area and they're kind of weak in this area and don't really want to shore it up all that much, and I can make it work and shift them around?
So, obviously we're always striving for a really well-rounded person, and ideally that person also wants to be well-rounded. In a topic that we'll argue about later, one of my strengths, coming from StrengthsFinders, which is, we'll talk about that later on, is individualization, right? Which basically means I see every person as unique and want to really craft and shape things to kind of their skills. And so very much so, I'm thinking all the time about, how do I give this person the opportunities to advance their skill set, both in the ways that I think they should advance them and in the ways they want to advance them, right? And so, if somebody's really passionate about, hey, I want to really get some chances to work on these kinds of things, I will do my best to make sure they're going to get those kinds of opportunities. And it has a lot to do with keeping people motivated, interested, and excited about the work they do in their job. So
reconcile that with, because you said well-rounded, which is a little bit of a scary term.
So is
that a minimum level of competence, but then you're spending most of your time on the stuff that you
it's like if you're a bartender who can only make 5 beverages, you should want to learn to make more beverages, right? Because then you'll be a better bartender.
Unless you're working at like a pub, and all you have to do is pull the tap. But here in Atlanta we have mixologists.
This bartender metaphor is really taken off, eh?
Yeah. Who came up with that? But so do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's, I guess here's how I look at it. An analyst is somebody who exists on sort of this continuum, and I usually think of that continuum as sort of functional to technical, mostly because that's sort of in our work how we align people. There's other ways you could probably do it, and maybe even better ways. Everybody should be open to expanding on that continuum, right? Like, I want to learn more about the things I don't know about. That's part of what's going to make me a great analyst, is that hunger to get better at honing my craft, to learn things I don't know. Like, I think it's part and parcel. And if you go all the way back to episode 1, right, it's sort of like, keep learning things. Get out there and do stuff. Test things out. Like, this is how to become a better analyst. And that's what I mean by getting more well-rounded. Not to be a jack of all trades and master of none. I think specialization and key areas of focus are important, but never close yourself off to broadening your skill set, I guess is how I'd say that.
So I just, and I won't belabor it too much. I think that's actually, from what I've seen, both with teams as well as with clients that I've worked with, there's a kind of a fine distinction, because even if you made it as simple as a binary functional and technical, and somebody is pretty strong on the technical and maybe they're a little weak on the functional, then they could hunger to learn more, and they're going to gravitate to learning more on that technical. And it's funny because as we talk about StrengthsFinders later, like the precursor book, the first Break All the Rules, like that's my absolute favorite kind of management book that says, don't take somebody and say you need to be well-rounded, so we're going to look at what your gaps are. Like, you just don't seem to have the technical. You don't want to get in and debug in the console in Chrome and actually figure out what's being passed. Like, you need to have some minimum level of that, but we're not going to turn you into, I think from our last episode, we're not going to turn you into a JavaScript developer, but you love going out and helping business users kind of articulate and capture what their KPIs are. So you can be hungry to, and I guess this is what I'm throwing out to the two of you guys. Do you say, yeah, why don't you push the thing that you're already pretty strong at, and you're going to and push that as far as you can so you become an absolutely superlative. But we've got really just kind of a baseline on other things. You have to be able to, throw up the digital pulse debugger, and you have to understand what the difference between props and evars or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you say no, you need to be the whole level needs to rise kind of in parallel if you're going to be, or at the same time if you're going to be well-rounded.
Well, I think that the three of us are used to dealing with quite significant teams of analysts, which frankly is really, really rare. Most organizations are lucky to have one person who's good, let alone two or three. And I think that every question that's being asked so far and every question we'll go through, I would basically have two answers. And one of them is for sub 5 people, and the other version of the answer would be for more than 5 people.
Yeah, and you kind of stole something I wanted to make sure we came back to as well, which is, there's two ways to look at this: the sort of practitioner side team versus sort of maybe the services or agency side team. And we mostly talked about it from that perspective because that's what all of us run.
I have to go back 10 years before I had anything or was working even with anyone who was more than a sub 5 team. So I'm primarily now, and probably the reason I get brought in is usually because teams are maybe they're a little too lean, but 0 to 2 is kind of what a lot of my clients have from an analyst perspective.
We probably should have had Dylan Lewis on as a guest for this show. But even with a small team, and maybe that's part of it. I think of the people who have been a one person. Well, if you're a one person team, then you're not really building and managing an analytics team. And the question is, like I said, I think of some of the people who have been frustrated because they're saying I'm the sole game in town. I have to handle everything from the tagging to troubleshooting to analysis to requirements gathering, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, go hire somebody else, and let's just say that I can go hire that person. Well, it's still a darn good time to say, well, now we're a 2-person team. I better figure out what I really gravitate to, and I should try to find somebody. I may totally click with somebody because we gravitate to the same thing. We love getting in and just coming up with crazy things to do with Adobe Analytics and all these like clever ways to capture data. Well, if you're a 2-person team, you don't need 2 people doing that because somebody's going to not be gravitating towards doing the analysis. Or right. So let me spend a second talking about when you bring a new analyst into an organization that's more like a small team in a company, right? So more to Tim Munsell's question as opposed to maybe Chris Johansson's, given where both those guys are from. And so when you bring a new analyst into an organization, it's all about getting that analyst able to present and do analysis for the organization. Typically, there's a lot of context building that has to happen. And I've always maintained there's a good 90 days at least before that analyst is worth a lick from an analysis perspective, and maybe closer to 6 months. Because if you go into the services organization, you've built processes and structure around the work that you do, and so you hand people those things, and they have experience, and they can apply that experience on some level. And obviously you're looking at kind of how they're applying it to increase the quality of how they're doing things and stuff like that. Inside of a organization, usually if it's been, a one guy or 1 or 2 people, there's a little less of that process that's already built, and the contextual understanding of the organization is really like that key milestone to begin to produce analysis that's really meaningful. I mean, a great way to do that is to become the guy who's in charge of, quote unquote, minding the store, if you will. Like, your job is to just look at all the dashboards, every week or every day, and ask the questions or find out what questions could be asked of those and dig into this data a little bit. Giving people those kinds of projects is a great way to do that.
See, I would go completely, and I'm thinking back a few years from when I was bringing on the team, and that'd almost be similarly with we have kind of no expectations that you're going to deliver glorious insight for the first 3 months or 6 months or whatever, but instead we're going to drag you along with somebody who's already highly regarded in the analyst organization. or whoever's responsible for analysts, we're going to take you to every meeting with the business.
Oh yeah,
and,
no,
and we're going to have you sit and listen, and then we're going to use that to go back and say, look, I've never had the bandwidth to go dig into this one thing, and we didn't commit that we're going to dig into this one thing, but this is a great way for you to learn our data and our business, because we have this quirky little thing, and that we don't sell stuff on our site, but we really want people to look at these infographics. So let's see if you can figure out what's going on there.
Tim, that works great up until you incorporate a millennial. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm not touching that. We already covered this one. We covered this
Again,
one.
There's a court order about you touching millennials. I think that's
it's because of the licking, really.
Worth a lick.
Yeah.
Anyways, no, I agree with that. And so, the idea is not to hide that person behind the reporting. It's more to get them as much exposure to as much of the business as possible. And I agree with having people attend meetings and be seen, but not heard, frankly, for a while.
I was going to say, I think the approach to kind of shepherding someone slowly into the organization, and even my example around, that kind of paired programming approach, is a luxury, again, that the vast majority of people that might be listening to this podcast can't afford because they're in tiny teams. I have 12 people in the analytics group that equals the whole company. Michael's team is even bigger than that. A lot of the organizations, Tim, that you work with probably have whole rooms full of analysts, right? I mean,
that's what I'm trying to be clear. No, there are massive organizations that have one or two.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're doing millions in revenue online, weekly, and they've got one full-time analyst. So it's incremental, right? The organization is always going to be. It's not like you're going to say we have no analyst, and now you bring in one analyst, and all of a sudden there are all these questions pouring on that person. I don't think pin-up demand works that way. I think anytime you bring someone on, there's kind of a realization that they're not going to be able to answer any and every question right off the bat. You've got to kind of use that time to say, how are we going to transition you in? And by the way, we also want to make sure we're not setting an expectation in the organization. We don't want to let you just get hammered with requests. You may be a millennial. You may feel good about that you're responding to people's requests, but you're also setting precedent. And there's a piece of that says, yeah, we now have more bandwidth. We can respond to these requests, but we can't just respond to the request. We got to make sure that we're kind of managing the intake. I mean, I think there's a risk there, right? You can say, oh, we have this person. You can start doing this weekly report. And the person's like, great, I can actually do a weekly report. I'll feel like I'm contributing to the organization. And 3 months later, they're like, crap, I'm doing this fucking weekly report. This thing is worthless. So you've got to kind of manage that carefully to say, I'm going to set the expectation that they're producing nothing, because when they are producing stuff, I want to make sure that it's stuff that's valuable. We didn't just bring on people to do monkey work.
Well, and hopefully the analyst you hired is the right kind of analyst who's going to get sick and tired of doing that report and is going to do some nice things to automate, increase efficiency so they don't have to spend very much time on that. So let's talk about motivation. So we've talked about onboarding and getting people up to speed. Let's talk about, how do you keep an analyst in your organization going? How do you keep their spirits high, keep them excited about the work? What are the things that you do to get an analyst to stay longer than the industry average of 18 months?
12 seconds. Well, you pay them. You pay them, and the last thing you do is have them go through any sort of Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder bullshit. Or maybe, I'm sorry, Michael, I don't know. How do you keep them motivated?
Well, I mean, everybody's got their ways, I feel like I can't give a serious answer to that question now.
I mean, we should probably say that when we were prepping for this, and I had said I absolutely love First Break All the Rules, and I absolutely hate the now discover your strengths. And as Michael was kind of semi-independently prepping, he was like, man, we love StrengthsFinder 2.0. So I don't know if you want to give. I think it works for some people. I'm not a huge fan, and I know you are.
We use it across the organization, and I think we might use it a little differently than maybe you've seen it used before or in the past. But yeah, because StrengthsFinders is not like here's a strength and it directly applies to how you will pull a report or analyze something. It's more like these are your strengths, and so how do we apply those strengths to kind of your role in the organization and what you do. But it gives people a
so
sense.
One of the strengths is analytical. Like, is that
Absolutely. And actually, so as a team, we map out everybody's strengths in a big sheet, and, surprise, surprise, analytical and strategic are like way dominant strengths in the organization, right? Just because, which is great. But the beauty of it is that a diversity of strengths gives you that much more flexibility and capability. And I'll be honest with you, I stole the idea. I was in a huddle at Exchange one year, and he was talking about how they did that, and so I stole it from their team. I was just like, that's a really great idea.
So quick aside, I'm gonna try to peg what your 5 strengths are. See if I can get it. You already said individualization.
Yep.
I'm gonna peg. I'm gonna go with analytical and strategic, just because those are playing the odds. I'm gonna go with harmony.
Nope.
Damn. I'm gonna go with woo. Woo.
Nope.
You gotta be a woo guy. You're not a woo guy.
Nope. Mm-mm.
Positivity.
I am positivity. Yeah.
Okay. Okay then what'd I miss?
I think input and developer or relator. I can't remember which one.
Okay.
Is there one for owns lots of baseball caps? Because I think I would get that one.
I think that's a collector.
Here it is. Here it is.
So not to belabor that, because I don't think it's contextually necessarily relevant for every person, but in terms of keeping people motivated, one of the things on the practitioner organizational side of things is understanding the business cycle. Like, one of the things that I think is really underappreciated is how long it takes in a particular organization for analysis to become action. And some organizations are just hopelessly stymied, right? Like,
so
that's
not the big business cycle from a club. You're saying like the pace at which the
business can move.
Yeah.
And businesses change their motivation from time to time, right? Like, an organization may shift from a new customer growth set of strategies to a customer retention and loyalty set of strategies over the course of a few years, which as an analyst then points you in different directions is keys to kind of the things that you should be analyzing and doing. And so that's one way to keep the job fresh and interesting, is to move with the business. I would say that's a lot of times, especially in large organizations, more of a tectonic thing, right? It's a slow-moving pace of change, but I think it's something that doesn't get capitalized on enough or doesn't get explained enough to analysts in an organization. Because if analysts are leaving an organization in 18 months, that means they literally had 1 year of actual utility, when they're probably not really going to hit their stride as an analyst in that organization till year 2.5. When they really start to get some traction and get going in an organization, start to make a difference, and start to see the things they were recommending a year ago start to hit the digital experiences and show incremental value. And honestly, that's the payoff, right? When you see the impact of your work, like, I analyzed this, we did this as a business, and we got this outcome, there's very few things, at least for me personally, that I find more professionally rewarding than that.
I think the one thing you missed, Michael, was allowing someone to screw up a couple of times.
Well, that goes in with the whole thing. Like, that's part and parcel. I always tell people, make a lot of mistakes, just never make the same one twice.
There's some level of what you want kind of all analysts to have around curiosity, some analytical, bent, strategic, that sort of thing. But it sounds like you were saying, well, you're laying all this out on a grid and saying, let's find the people who kind of have outlier strengths, and let's make sure that we're, one, playing to those strengths, but also kind of recognizing when it comes to maybe how they communicate or how they interact, that we can kind of work with that. So I feel like that's analytical bucket number one of how you can kind of very tactically, that's one tool to say, hey, we can use this, and we'll start to recognize maybe why there's this friction in this one place, because we have sort of different strengths and we're dealing with these things differently. I'll throw out kind of the other end of the spectrum and these aren't mutually exclusive by any means, but I'm a big fan because I've used it for 3 of my last 4 jobs, including even as a consultant, having a fairly detailed competencies matrix and calling it a true matrix because you have down one column, these are the skills. It's reporting, it's analysis and interpretation, it's digital marketing knowledge, it's troubleshooting, it's knowledge of analytics tools, it's professionalism. So some of it gets into requirements gathering, that sort of thing. That's one level. And then you've got across the top, what are the different roles? Maybe we have 3 different levels of just a digital analyst, but we also have more of an operations role. And filling in that grid and saying, what is it in a couple, 1 or 2 sentences that we expect at this level when it comes to team management? Guess what? As a digital analyst 1, there are no expectations of team management. But as a digital analyst 2, whether that's the HR title or not, but I found that to be useful. And this goes back, the one that I've used has kind of evolved in different organizations I've been at, what actually makes the most sense, and a little bit of credit to Michelle Kiss. She and I, before either one of us were at Demystified, actually collaborated a little bit on the one that I kind of use as my basis. But that is this other way to sit down with people and say, I'm going to, it starts to get a little HRE and performance review but I'm going to sit down and force myself to look through these 22 things and say, what level are you at? And then I'm going to sit down with you and have a discussion and say, I think you're kind of weak here. These are your biggest strengths. Now let's talk about that. Do you actually really see yourself moving forward? And I'm giving you kind of the clear career path, because you can look at that whole matrix and realize that to be a senior analyst or to actually manage the organization or be a lead or whatever our roles are, this is what it's going to take. So you're kind of laying out a path to these are the skills that you need to be demonstrating without necessarily saying, this is the role that you're going to go into.
So I agree with that, but I think it's also that's pretty. I feel like that's a universal management thing, right?
Well, but I feel like there are times when it winds up being just sort of platitudes, and it's not necessarily thought through of really what does it mean for our organization. And then, yeah, you're right, but that's fair. That's management 101.
So, Jim, you were going to say something, and then I'm going to tell you a story.
Stories?
Yeah,
outstanding.
story.
I was just going to switch it up a little bit because we've been talking an awful lot about team development, but we also seem to agree that the majority of organizations don't have teams to manage per se. And the question that and I have an answer, but let's say you're a director of marketing or the person in IT who's building the analytics group or whatever, and you can hire 3 people. Here's headcount for 3 people. What would be the 3 people that you get? Would it be 3 generalists? Would it be a hardcore tool practitioner? How would you approach it from that angle?
So you're basically saying, hey, I'm going to build a team of 3 people to do digital analytics in the organization.
Yeah, we have nobody. We've decided that measurement is a priority. We've come up with enough budget to basically hire 3 people.
All right. So here's what I would do. I would hire business analyst. I would hire a technical analyst, and I would move a really strong manager from a different area in the organization who's been there for a while over to manage those 2 people. That's what I would do.
Yeah, ideally somebody who's been kind of hankering and has some interest in the data.
Right. Somebody who knows the organization and knows how to get stuff done.
And is well regarded, because you're probably going to have to be breaking down a lot of barriers because you got to shift.
And that's a good call. Isn't afraid to let their people shine underneath them, right? So go to the analytics folks and say, okay, you guys, I'm here to clear the road for you. Tell me what we're going to accomplish, and hold them to it, right? Be a good manager. So I think that's an ideal setup. If you can get something like that, or if you're the digital analytics manager and you're in that organization for a long time, then look for a complementary skill set. Don't try to hire somebody exactly like you. Find somebody that's sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. So if you're more of a business analyst, hire somebody a little more technical, and you'll find that complementary aspect will pay off, I think, quite a bit.
Yeah, I would have said exactly the same thing as you, except that you're steal someone who's well regarded in the org to be the leader of the little tiger team. I really like that idea. I would have gone outside and got someone who was more of a kind of senior business analyst to run the two of them, and I take that back because I think one of the biggest problems with building an analytics team internally is what you guys are touching on in terms of the impact that it has on culture and getting people to start thinking of measurement before they do something and not after they do it. So I really like that idea, and I think the other thing, both of you guys, Tim said it at the beginning of the session, and I was going to say it, Michael, you just said it, but that concept of the analytics operations person. So someone who is, and we touched on this in our last session, just the importance of someone who understands business analysis but is highly technical and kind of lives between IT and marketing and can turn requirement solicitation into technology implementation. To me, it's such a critical role that's even rarer than a digital analyst, in my opinion. And I think we all agree you got three people. One of them is that kind of, I would call them an analytics professional, but the operations or technical analyst.
And I'll say the other thing you said, being comfortable with people who are working, who are going to work in that team, who are going to be better at something than, when I had the largest team I ever managed was just under 20 people, and there were multiple people in that group that in certain areas could completely run circles around me. And that ranged from everything from being super highly regarded in certain really tough organizations to penetrate within the company, but then even more so the hardcore stats person, and saying, yeah, that's fine, that's needed. So when back to kind of thinking of what's my team, you're trying to build a high functioning team. You're not trying to build a high functioning set of individuals. And so that's I think that actually may be one of the bigger challenges for the person who is building or managing that team, is actually understanding that full spectrum and recognizing that it does run all the way from the technical side of the knowledge to the communication, to the relationship building, to the doing the analysis, to building and automating reports, and sort of having that always kind of something that they're kind of keeping in their mind of where do we as collectively as a team, what are our gaps, and what's the best way to fill that gap? Is it hiring somebody else? Is it somebody who who would want to pursue that and letting them pursue it a little bit more? But it's kind of a little bit of a puzzle that you're trying to put together to say collectively we've got to cover this whole range of things.
Yeah, no, I think that's just it. And I like the puzzle metaphor. So one of the things, and my team can tell you this is true, when I first started building my team, I was like, hey, everybody can kind of choose their own title, pick any title you want. I really don't care. I'm not driven by titles. So, as long as it's not completely unreasonable. When I first joined Search Discovery, I wanted my title to be Captain Bounce Rate, which that got turned down. That's how we started doing it, a bunch of the hires, and then we brought in our COO into the organization, and sitting down and starting to organize things, and he's like, "What are you doing here? This team's going to get much bigger, and everybody's got this hodgepodge."
I thought you were going to say that was actually the receptionist, but he said that he wanted to be the COO, so he was the COO.
No, that was just the COO.
Okay.
So just this hodgepodge of titles. How are you going to give people a clear understanding of their career path? You're going to invent unique career paths for every single person? That's impossible. So we had to go back and standardize titles, and I had to go back to some of my people and explain to them why I was changing their title from one thing to another. In some cases, it didn't sound as cool as what they had come up with. But at the end of the day, the conversations actually went well because people understood the reason we're doing this is so that we can make sure that we're getting you ready for this next opportunity. And to what you said, Tim, which is here's the progression that you're on, here's the skills at each level that you're building and that you need to kind of be thinking about, and here's how we're going to get you there, right? So here's the opportunity. And honestly, I think that's a really big key to keeping people happy in their jobs is how do they know they're progressing? What are my steps for progression? and how am I making an impact? Those are kind of the two. All right. I feel like I talked quite a bit. So why don't we wrap this up, and I'll let you guys say something.
Jim, you want to wrap first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jim Kane. You may remember me from the introductions at the beginning of the podcast where I said something. I think that things for me, the one thing that I didn't mention earlier is that I think the number one thing when you're growing your team is that, whether you've got 2 people or 200 people, anybody who's really into analytics or measurement really is passionate about action and not just throwing stuff into Excel. And if you alienate someone doing work from the ability to help get wins with the work, like presenting it to an executive or analyzing a recommendation they made after it was done or helping something happen, that's where you start having people feel like they're data monkeys and all they do is just throw stuff into Excel and you'll lose them. I think the second thing that I thought was really interesting today is that the 3-person teams that we all built were exactly the same ones. And, so if you have no people on your team, you need a technical person, you need a business analyst, and you need that kind of senior stakeholder ideally within the org. If you're going to build a 30-person team, really we've identified the 3 types of person that make up that 30-person team. So you don't end up with 29 business analysts and 1 technical person. To me, they're equally weighted. I think the third point that I would make is that as you start to grow a team, some of the things we talked about today have nothing to do with analytics. They have to do with operations and HR best practices. And a lot of the companies that we work with that are, quite large, the measurement team is almost treated like, or the digital team is treated like an internal startup. And things that would be considered standard business practices for the rest of the org, they're almost learning for the first time in the digital group. And so really thinking about to go from 5 people to 15 people requires a boot camp in HR, in operations, in tooling, in fostering collaboration, and how to run a meeting. There's a lot of important things that aren't measurement related. My pop turned down promotions for 20 years once he hit a certain level because he wanted to do the work and not facilitate other people doing the work. And that's what happens when an organization gets to a certain size. And it's something that you need to plan for as you grow your team, or else it will go bang. I think those are my big points.
Wow, those are which are good ones. I'll use the opportunity to throw in one point we didn't talk about when it comes to building a team. You know what? There are times when you have to recognize that this person is not a fit might not be a fit for analytics, might not be a fit for the organization. Either one, there's only so much time you can kind of, you got to call it, and hopefully not fire them. Hopefully, kind of have the discussion and recognize that they're not necessarily a fit in the role they're in. But I think the other stuff, I largely, I think Jim recapped it pretty well. And
so I think one of my takeaways, and it's also something we didn't quite touch on, but I want to mention, which is to all of us in this industry, we all live in a world that doesn't have enough analysts in it for a digital. And so every time we onboard an analyst, we're not only doing something for our business, but we're doing something for our industry. And that ought to make you feel pretty special. So way to go, everybody out there. Secondarily, I liked how we started moving from, how do we get a great analyst onboarded to how do we create a high-functioning team. And that high-functioning team concept and the culture around it, Tim, that you kind of talked about, I think that really, that gels with me a lot. And then thirdly, can't say enough about the benefits of StrengthsFinders 2.0. I'm serious, Tim.
Is there a Bitly where you can actually get your affiliate code for?
That's right. Yeah. No, unfortunately, I'm not receiving any compensation for that. But yeah, we give that book to every single new hire and use it in our performance management processes. I do believe in it, and I like how it is setting people up to focus on the things that they're where their strengths are as they approach their careers in their professional life in analytics. So I'm excited about it. Anyways, great show, guys. I loved your insights. Hopefully this will be helpful. Thanks again to Tim Munsell and Chris Johansson for bringing this topic up. I think, as with all of our topics, we never do it the justice it deserves. And so please put your thoughts into this on our Facebook page, and also reach up to us on Twitter. And hey, if you're not on the Measure Slack, that would be a place where you could also hook up and give us some of your points of view on the show, apparently. So so I guess that's our show. This is about the sloppiest ending ever, but I think it's a subject I think you could tell there's equal passion on all of our parts about this topic. And so thanks for listening, and I'd love to hear your comments. Thanks a lot. Tim and Jim, it's been a pleasure as always.
Peace out.
Cheers.
Good day.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. We welcome your comments and questions. Facebook.com/Analytics Hour or at Analytics Hour on Twitter.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.